It's good to see you here for the presentation of this Apostolic Exhortation. I would like to make a technical comment. At 12, there should be a website, the website Dilexi, and at 12 at noon, the Dicastery for Integral and Human Development is going to also make available some documents which we already sent you this morning. And if you had any difficulties in opening them, you will find them on this website, which will be on at noon. I would like to again say that we are very happy for today's occasion to present the Apostolic Exhortation Dilexi by Pope Leo XIV. The title, as you have read, refers to a passage in the Apocalypse, and it's in continuity with the encyclical Dilexit Nos of Pope Francis of last October, the Revelation, sorry. And already in the third paragraph, Pope Leo explains that it's a reflection on the love for the Church, of the Church for the poor and with the poor, so it expands and deepens that love towards the poor, which is the subtitle of the document. I would like to make some comments before giving the floor to today's speakers, whom I warmly welcome. First of all, the framework in which this picture is placed, that is being explained by the Pope. This is not the horizon of charity, but revelation. Being in touch with those who have no power and greatness is an essential way to encounter the Lord in history. In the poor, he still has something to tell us. It is significant also that the paradigm of the text is represented by one of the most difficult passages in the Gospel. At the beginning of chapter 1 of the Gospel of Matthew, in chapter 26, we read, "Why this waste? The disciples wonder concerning the woman who had poured on Jesus' head a scented and expensive perfume. It could have been sold for much money and given to the poor." But Jesus defends the woman. The text seems to be in opposition to the theme of the document itself, but the Pope quotes it specifically and indicates the responsibility of the Christian towards the man or woman before him or her, giving them the most precious perfume one has, in this case the Messiah, who is poor, suffering, whose pain and solitude and need is recognized. And as the poor, quoting St. Augustine, are not just a person to help, but they represent the sacramental presence of the Lord. And the poor are not a sociological category, but the flesh of Christ. So charity is not an obsession, but the burning heart of the gospel. So this is a picture that places this reflection in continuity with the foundations of the Council's reflections. And this has been highlighted in the text itself, but today we are going to have our speakers to help us in this reflection. And I would like to begin from His Eminence Cardinal Michael Churning, Prefect for the Dicastery for Integral Human Development, and I warmly welcome him for being here with us. Thank you, and good morning to everybody.
Wounds, whether physical, social, or spiritual, the Church proclaims that the kingdom of God embraces the vulnerable. In every act of care, such as visiting the sick, the Christian community experiences salvation as a concrete relationship with those who bear the marks of the cross in their flesh. Poverty, a huge social problem, is also a theological theme. Through the poor, God speaks to the Church. Faith becomes real in mercy and service that break down barriers, and God's people experience the beatitude of the poor in spirit. Recent Church teaching understands that poverty results from structures of sin. Selfishness and indifference solidify in economic and cultural systems. The economy that kills measures human value in terms of productivity, consumption, and profit. This dominant mentality makes it acceptable to discard the weak and unproductive, and thus deserves the label social sin. Beyond donations and other assistance, the Church's response denounces the false impartiality of the market, proposes models of development, promotes justice, and aims for the conversion of structures. This fosters a form of communal or social repentance that restores dignity to the invisible and helps them to develop more fully. St. John Paul II urged the poor to become protagonists of ecclesial and social transformation. For example, popular movements, with their moral energy, demonstrate that justice arises from including the excluded. Besides suffering privation, the poor can be bearers of hope and builders of a common destiny. Let the Church assist them, be evangelized by them, recognize the Spirit at work in them, and together proclaim the gospel. Promoting integral human development, according to the social teaching of the Church, intertwines education, Eucharist, and service. Education is the first act of justice because it frees people from spiritual poverty and prepares them for social participation and responsibility. The Eucharist brings people together, nourishes the community, and missions it to charity and solidarity. And finally, service is social love in concrete form, care for the poor and for our common home. Thus, the Church offers mercy to the world, promoting a civilization in which every person is recognized as the image of God. In Dilexi, Pope Leo joins Pope Francis in declaring there will be no peace as long as the poor and the planet are neglected and abused. Christian peace is reconciling and reconciled justice. The poor, Mother Teresa said, do not need our pity, but our respectful love. Treating them with dignity is the first act of peace. Only a society with the discarded at its center can be truly peaceful. And only a world of such societies can be at peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Eminence. Thank you for your words that highlight also some of the topics of the exhortation, for what you mentioned about social structure, social sin, the response of the Church in the intertwining of education, Eucharist and service, and for what you were mentioning about the connection between meeting the poor, encounter with the poor, ministry with the poor, and peace, of course. Ora darei la parola a Sua Eminenza il Cardinal Konrad Krajewski, prefetto del
I would like to give the floor now to Cardinal Konrad Krajewski, prefect of the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development. I have never spoken for 13 years, but the most important thing, as Pope Francis used to say, was do things rather than speak. After the election of Pope Leo, he told me concerning the almsgiving service, let us continue. This document talks about what we do and in which way in the almsgiving sector. We are the ambulance, the ER of Pope Leo, an ambulance that is always ready to leave and start and help in his name the needy, the poor. When I was coming, I saw so many ambulances that are all around, but they're not used. They are there, they're ready to help people. You don't even need to call the emergency service, they are there. And I think that this document speaks about this. And through the centuries, we see that the Church has always been ready to help the poor. And so what did Jesus do? Well, he would leave his house early in the morning, and he would be looking all the time for the people who needed him. He would go and look for people. He didn't say, well, I'm only available for a couple of hours a day. No, this is not what he did. and he would reach out and look for people. The people who needed him, those who were suffering, the ill, the marginalized, the refugees, he would heal them immediately on the same day. He would never send Peter and Mary Magdalene out. He wouldn't send them out, come back to me in a couple of weeks and then let's see what we can do. There is only today in the gospel. This is what is certain today. And we see this in the gospel everywhere. Everything happens today. And he would tell the apostles to feed people. When? Now. So it's good to see that Pope Leo has this attention for the poor, with the poor, to show that the poor are a part of the journey of the church. The document truly shows us that love for those who are poor is essential, and they are an evangelical guarantee. This is what we find in the document of a church which is faithful to the heart of Jesus. In the document, the Pope also explains to us what it means to be Christians. To be like the Good Samaritan means to be Christian. And for me, the third chapter is particularly beautiful. And the fathers of the church speak, the saints up to Mother Teresa. And they tell us how Jesus was recognized in the poor, how they would put Jesus' words into practice. I was naked, I was in prison, I was a refugee. How the poor, since the beginning of the church, are always at the center of the church. Once Pope Francis told me at the beginning, you must put aside your desk, you must leave the Vatican, do not stand behind me, because the almsgiver would always stand behind the Pope. I don't want you in the Vatican. You have to reach out so you will know what the poor need. And you will be at the center of the gospel. It's going to be difficult at first, but then it's going to be the most beautiful that can happen to us in the church, recognizing Jesus among the poor, in the poor. So this chapter is really beautiful because it begins from St. Lawrence, when the Roman authorities asked the treasures of the church to be brought to them. He brought the poor. In the church, we must always be constantly updated and just not do what we want to do, but we must understand what our poor needs. The past showed us that we need to be prepared and we have to be very flexible. At the beginning of the pontificate of Pope Francis, we had so many migrants, so many refugees, almost 1,000 every day that would reach the Tiburtina train station, 1,000 people who were hungry, invisible to the state, with no papers, nothing. They were coming from Lampedusa, the island. If you are with them, if you spend time with them, you get to know what they need. It's not necessarily food, but they needed phone cards to be able to call their relatives and tell them, I've survived, I'm in Rome, be at peace. For even though 350 people have died, 150 survived. You remember this terrible shipwreck. We must be flexible because this document too tells us how we should behave with the refugees and the marginalized, to welcome, protect, promote, and integrate. And then there was COVID. It's totally different, also in connection with the poor. I saw for the first time the poor who were hungry and who were suffering here in Rome. Everything was shut down, closed down, and they could not eat anywhere. They could not move about the city. They could not be vaccinated because they had no papers, they had no healthcare card. So we had to help them differently. They were vaccinated in the whole Paul VI, in the ambulances of the Vatican, without papers, without the health care card. So this shows how over the centuries help has changed over time, but the church would always recognize the face of Jesus among the poor. Now there is war on the doorstep of Europe, and our help is totally different. Think about the generosity of all the people who in Rome left from the Basilica of Saint Sophia over Greek Catholics. So many people sent essential things such as drugs and medicines and clothing. And the last part of this document concerns almsgiving. It's a beautiful thing, and the Holy Father says that this word today is not held in the esteem it deserves. It's a bit unknown. We know that prayer is important, fasting is important, but almsgiving is essential. And this is highlighted in this document, that almsgiving erases sins, and I need almsgiving to erase my sins. And if you need this too, come to us and we will help you give donations to the poor. We'll send everything to Gaza or to Kiev. We have this possibility during the synod. In 24 hours, everything that we collected we sent to the parish church of Gaza. And the last thing I would like to say is that everything that is contained in this document, this is a personal note, everything that is in this document is what I heard directly from Pope Francis. When I went to him, he would always explain to me what I should be doing, what I shouldn't be doing. Not speak with journalists, for instance. Well, this came from him. He told me, you must do things, and then they must look for what you did. But once in the evening, I was a bit tired, so I went to the Holy Father and said, Holy Father, you don't know what happens on the colonnade. And at the heart of the square, there are 6,000 people every month that can take showers. There is an outpatient clinic. We have some 100 doctors, and 2,000 people are visited every day. You know how many medicines we must give out for free? Because everybody receive a medicine if they are sick. And so every month we speak 25,000 euros just for drugs, medicines. And he was looking at me, and I imagine he would say something significant to me. So I said, every month we need a lorry with shirts, socks, etc. And he said, Conrad, you are outside of the gospel. You don't realize that you are healing Christ, that you are clothing Christ, that you are welcoming Christ, that you cut people's hair, but you are cutting Jesus Christ, who comes under the colonnade in different disguises, but it's him. So you are directly helping Christ, and you're complaining? So it was like a cold shower. But the document precisely speaks about this, and we must recognize in the poor Christ himself. And at first, we may not realize this, but we are helping him directly. Thank you. And of course, this was Cardinal Krajewski, prefect of the dicastery for the service of charity. Sorry if I invited you here. It's my fault. It's my responsibility. So as His Eminence was saying, it's good to have a document which is really something that explains to everybody what it is to love the poor as Christians. You were talking about COVID, war, and how poverty changes over time. And closeness to the poor offers a Christian perspective to understand and interpret the time in which we live. In the gospel there is today, you were saying, and love for the poor, and it changes history. And I'm sure have seen this, and many of us have seen this, Christians approaching the poor. And you were then talking about recognizing Jesus in the poor as the presence of Christ, and you were highlighting as an important element in this document the rehabilitation of almsgiving. And so in this sense, I would like to give the floor to the Petit Sœur Clémence, the little sister of Jesus, whom I thank for being here with us today.
Vorrei tanto.
I would like that in my place on this occasion, there were Lacri Pano, one other of the Roma women of Romanian origin with whom we shared our lives in a piece of land that was abandoned in the south of Italy. We spent there many years. These women, as the exhortation reminds us, because of their situation of marginalization, are doubly poor, but in whom we find the most admirable gestures of daily heroism in protecting and taking care of the fragility of their families. And I remember Ankutsa, who came into our hut with a smile on her lips and a big loaf of bread in her hands. This is a memory that is very much present in my heart. She gave us half of the loaf of bread and she said, "This is for your dinner." So witnesses, we were astonished witnesses for their offering. We were touched by the attention they gave us, these women, in the awareness that for them it was so difficult to earn a living. Even though materially poor, these people are rich in humanity, as Ankusa. Many of these people did not go to school, but they have within them that wisdom that is formed through the experience of precariousness that leads to sharing and solidarity. The Holy Father invites us to recognize the mysterious wisdom that God wishes to communicate to us through them. By their example, through their example, we rediscover solidarity, because while concerned about preserving our riches, we often tend to forget all this. I have loved you. This sentence is something that Luminitsa lived personally. She lived it. I still see myself seated on her bed in her little hut that was small but very well taken care of, while she was telling us, I was that lost sheep, unruly, and he, the Lord, he came to find me. And he took me on his shoulders like this, as I was, and he traveled with me. That day, I admired but also envied her for her faith. And I saw clearly that her relationship with the Lord was much simpler, more direct, more concrete than mine. That is why I see myself in Dilexi, where we read it's a surprising experience that becomes a real turning point in our personal life when we realize that it is precisely the poor who evangelize us. I cannot but remember that time in June 2014 when an accidental fire burned up the huts in the field. The little that we had and what another 60 families had was entirely destroyed over a few minutes. No more shelter, no more housing, no more clothes, no places to cook. We had to start everything anew. And yet, on that day, I never heard a single complaint from our friends and neighbors, only a litany of praise. Thanks to God we are all alive. God has accompanied us this far and He will not abandon us. Tomorrow we will start again with the help of God. It is through them that I discovered this ability to focus on the essential, life, the present moment, in confident abandonment to providence. In this, they were and continue to be my spiritual teachers. Thanks be to Pope Leo for the message he has offered us today. This call to a church that is poor and for the poor, but especially with the poor. This apostolic exhortation allowed me to revisit all these years lived among our Roma friends and to discover how what we had lived together was for me a sacrament, as emphasized in the text where we read, the poor is not just someone to help, but he represents a sacramental presence of the Lord. Together with them, as the Holy Father invites us to be, let us set out to bring about this new civilization where the poor are not problems to solve, but brothers and sisters to welcome, because we have all been loved. Thank you, Sister Clemence, for your personal reflections and for your sharing what you told us about your life, also starting again from the exhortation. And thank you also for your words of beatitude that you expressed. Your witness echoes the words of Roma women who have been wounded, but who entrust themselves to Jesus and who try to do the will of the Lord, who loves and protects his little sisters. So the Pope expressed in the exhortation the gratitude of the Church for those who decide to live with the poor, and I am sure that these words are also addressed to you. Thank you. And now I would like to give the floor to Brother Frédéric Marie Leméoté, Provincial of the Friar Minors of France and Belgium, Doctor in Theology, and we thank him for his participation and his presence here with us today. Thank you. Thank you and good morning to everybody. The starting point of Dilexi is love for a community of people who are weak and who are exposed to violence. And beyond the definitions of poverty, the poor are not here by chance, nor because of blind destiny. It's the structures of sin that create poverty and deep inequality. So we must pay attention, focus on these people who are suffering, who are weak and who are poor. And as the Pope told us, sometimes women are doubly poor. So it's not just a matter of fighting against the structural causes of poverty, but also to reach out to those who are more distant and far removed from our attention, as we are invited to do by the document. We must live with these people and see what their needs are, but we must also be realistic. And the Pope says we feel more at ease without the poor, and it's very true, because they shake up our habits and they place us before realities that we prefer to ignore. So the Pope invites us to shift our gaze. The poor are not just a problem. They are part of our family. They are brothers and sisters whom we must welcome. And the Pope gives us the reason why for this reception. Because God singled them out. And I quote number 21. It is to them that the word of hope and liberation of the Lord is addressed first and foremost. This privileged choice of God can make us feel uneasy. We would prefer probably an impartial God. But certainly, salvation is for everyone. But it is also based on concrete relationships. God's logic starts from those who are excluded from the stone that has been placed to build his kingdom on it. So engagement with the poor is not just a consequence of our faith, it's an epiphany, an almost liturgical act, because we cannot separate worship from God and from the worship of God from the attention to the poor. In this appeal to recognize him in the poor and the suffering, Christ's heart is revealed to us. The love of the poor is the evangelical guarantee of a church faithful to the heart of God, and a community that tries to stay tranquil without trying in a creative way to assist the poor. Well, this community is destined to lose its evangelical vigor. Dilexi reminds us that we need to engage for the poor, give to the poor, particularly through almsgiving, as it is said at the end of the document, but it also insists on the fact that we should learn to act with them. The acceleration of contemporary problems, and it's number 82, is not only to be endured, but it must also be confronted and analyzed by the poor. And this term is important because the poor have a thought, thinking. In other words, they can be actors, protagonists, not just the objects of our compassion or of our policies. So they can help us analyze problems. And especially, they are carriers of true solutions. So we must understand things from their perspective. And this is necessary because, as we read in number 82, reality is better seen from the margins. And there is a particular and essential intelligence there that is indispensable for the church and humanity. So we can better understand the mundane logics that act in society and in the church. And it is starting from this that we can denounce a politics and an economies that are dominated by a happy minority that grabs riches and imposes sacrifices on people to achieve objectives that are only important for the powerful. In summary, Dilexi speaks about a God who is merciful and who gives himself to the poor. It's a theology of a diaconia and service based on criterions of truth, and a social ethic that stretches a hand out through almsgiving and fights for justice against structures of sin. The last words are significant. There is no limit on love. And all men and women should be loved. Every person in difficulty should be able to live in dignity. And this is our compass for us to build a church in which nobody feels left behind and abandoned. Thank you. Thank you, Father, for your words. You were calling the words of the poor. The Pope said the poor are our own. So we should take action with them, because reality is better seen from the peripheries, from the margins, and you don't really see them from the standpoint of the happy minority. But I would like now to hand it over to the journalists for their questions. As usual, I would like to ask you to say your name, the name of your newspaper, and the question and the name of the person the question is addressed to. Vania De Luca, TG3 Rai, Italian national broadcaster. Today we also people die because of the war. We've seen children in Gaza die of anger. I would like to ask you for a comment concerning the agreement reached for Gaza, and if there are any comments from the Holy See. Well, this piece of news arrived this morning, and of course it's something that we very much hope for. The Pope said so on Tuesday when the Pope met you, spoke along these lines, and if there are further comments, we shall share them with you in the coming days, unless His Eminence wishes to say something. Undoubtedly, we shall see in the coming days what the Church is going to say. Phil Pulella.
This is for Cardinal Czerny. Pope Francis did not have a very good relationship with President Trump regarding immigration. In paragraph 75 of this document, Pope Leo repeats the concept of building bridges rather than walls, which was a literal criticism of by Pope Francis of President Trump. This document is kind of like a four-hands piano piece. We really don't know who said what, in a sense. So how much of a continuation of Pope Francis's immigration policy? How much is this document an immigration of a continuation of Pope Francis's immigration policy by Pope Leo? And the second thing, just a curiosity, I'm sure you'll, in listing all the religious orders that made a huge contribution to education, Pope Leo mentions the La Salle brothers, the Maris, the Ursulines, the Salesians, but he doesn't mention the Jesuits, which is your thing. Education. Do you think this was a sign of humility by Pope Francis or an oversight by Pope Leo?
Since we're at least sometimes not famous for humility, let me say that it was more of an act of let's say penitence on the part of Pope Francis than it's an oversight on the part of Pope Leo. I suppose that what we have here in our hands is an icon of the magisterium of the Church, because this happens every time there's a new pope. no new pope starts with an empty desk and a clear agenda. And so it's really not, if you don't mind me saying so, not really very relevant to ask who wrote what. This is Pope Leo's document. It is the magisterium of the Church. Later, scholars will dig here and dig there, but it's not really interesting for us. And so look at the signature, see the citations, remember Pope Francis, but this is Pope Leo's.
Thank you, Your Eminence. Angela Ambrogetti.
Angela Ambrogetti, ci stampa a couple of things. One, maybe I'm ignorant, I don't know, why an apostolic exhortation rather than an encyclical as first document, if you know and can explain this to us. Number two, what percentage of Pope Francis we find in here and what is percentage of Pope Leo? It's true that the magisterium continues, but percentages change. Thank you. Well, I think that His Eminence has already answered the second question, but I don't know, maybe he wishes to add something.
Know that the Gospels are not written directly by the one evangelist who has signed or to whom we attribute the Gospel. Now, scholars have an enormous task to try to answer your question when it comes to the Gospels, and that's very nice and very fine, but it's not the lens through which people can actually benefit from the Gospel. And I would say the same thing about the encyclical, about this exhortation. It is Pope Leo's. It is the first since Pope Francis has died. I'm not a great historian, but I suspect that there are documents like this all through the history of the Church, maybe only recently that they frankly say, well, I received this from my predecessor, but this is what the Church does. We always receive from our predecessors and we always hand on to our followers. So I can't help you with your percentage, I'm sorry. It's 100% Francis and it's 100% Leo. No, in English, we say... No, the answer is, I can't give you a precise answer. I mean, obviously, encyclical is more elaborate, more complete, more longer. I think that an exhortation is meant to be understood as maybe I could put it this way. An exhortation permits the Pope to focus really on one point and to elaborate it with leisure. Whereas an encyclical, we have come to understand, is also very multi-dimensional, more complex. For example, a question that already more or less came up, why does this not treat of war? If this was an encyclical, I think you could rightly say, well, why doesn't it also treat of war and why doesn't it also treat of climate change? But this is an exhortation, and it's an exhortation, as the subtitle says, Amore verso il povero. And so the exhortation, I would suggest, allows the Holy Father to focus on one question and not have to give a kind of a complete or synthetic teaching.
Un pochino questo c'è anche nel primo capitolo, Angela, del...
This is also to be found in the first chapter of the exhortation because there are references to Dilexi Nos as an encyclical from which some thoughts of Pope Leo have been shared to the magisterium of the Church. There was Javier. Let us make a round. Good morning. Thank you for the presentation. Javier Martinez Brocal from ABC, a Spanish newspaper. I wanted to ask Cardinal Czerny if he can help me understand the concept, structure of sin. So if you can explain with some example what it means. And also Cardinal Krajewski, I would like to thank him because speaking about gestures makes us understand. I have something that I'm curious about. At the beginning of a previous pontificate, sometimes we heard that Pope Francis, there was this legend that he had gone with you to help the poor in the Vatican area. And I don't know if you want to tell us something about it. if this happened, if it's a legend or something about it. Thank you. Well, the almoner is the person who goes when the father cannot go himself. Thank you.
Drug trade and drug traffic is a good example of a structure of sin because it is supported by an infinite number of personal choices. And those personal choices, each of which is, I don't know if you can call them immediately sinful, more or less sinful, certainly not good, but maybe one can somehow. Anyway, they coalesce, they congeal, they solidify into something terrificante and something practically beyond human control. And it has infiltrated the economy, it has infiltrated government, it has probably infiltrated media, although I'm less capable of affirming that. But I think that if you take the time to meditate a bit on the lifestyle choice of somebody who says, I'm going to smoke coke or I'm going to take coke, or the already addicted choice of somebody poor who's going to sniff airplane glue, and see how this accumulates into what is now our crushing burdens of corruption and crime and evil that I don't know if I'm exaggerating, that actually can control states. That is a good example of structural sin. It is to be taken very, very, very seriously. Thank you.
Grazie, Eminenza.
Thank you, Your Eminence. Cindy? Thank you.
Wooden from Catholic News Service. Cardinal Czerny, you mentioned that this topic is obvious. Poverty is obviously a social concern, but it's also a theological issue. Many people would say that Pope Francis addressed these kinds of issues from a mainly social, political, and perhaps pastoral point of view. Whereas this exhortation, it shows Pope Leo addressing it more from a theological point of view. Is that distinction valid? Thank you.
The distinction is valid in the sense that there are emphases which one can read, one can compare texts, but it's not very helpful and it's not very true. Pope Leo is making things more explicit that Pope Francis left less explicit, and you could say vice versa. And one of the, if you allow me a personal comment, one of the crimes of our time is that you're supposed to say everything about something all at once. And that if you say something at all partial or fragmentary or one aspect, you're immediately attacked for not having mentioned the 17 other aspects. And that is crippling. It's crippling. We can't say everything about everything all the time. We have to be able to say something about something once in a while. And so the richness, the wealth, the beauty of this exhortation is certainly matched by the richness, wealth, and beauty of the things that Pope Francis said and published. But you will never find a way of putting this on scales and say, Francis is more social and Leo is more theological. You're not going to get anywhere with that.
Poi resta anche l'enciclica Dilexi in questo senso.
And there is also the encyclical Dilexi, which is another witness. The colleague at the back.
Sorry.
Didn't recognize with the hat. Thank you so much. My question is, I'm sure you've seen the images of what's going on in the United States right now with migrants and refugees being terrorized, essentially, by ICE agents who are masked and are not protected by the law. And this document makes a strong point about Catholics taking on the mantle of justice, standing up with movements, with missionaries, with lay people to really defend the poor. And who are the poorest right now in many places are migrants and refugees and asylum seekers. Is it correct, in your opinion, to interpret, for a US Catholic to read this document and think, the Pope is calling me to stand up for migrants and refugees in any way possible in my country? Thank you.
I'm sorry for hogging the microphone. Everything that you said is true until you made it sort of exclusive to the United States. Everything you said is valid in France, and it's valid in India, and it's valid in Australia and South Africa. So, but it's like the gospel. No one could ever say that the gospel is especially addressed to England or especially addressed to Bolivia. No, we have to read and respond where we are. And so all the huge questions of this text, other texts, and all the moral force of the gospel of Jesus' teaching and practice is basically to find out, well, what am I called to do, and what is the first step I ought to take? That's the real question for each and every one. There's a whole other one about policy, but that's a different question, and you didn't ask about that, so I won't go into policy questions. But please don't try to target teaching like this. Everybody everywhere needs to hear this. Maybe some will say, well, yeah, but migrants aren't the primary, let's say, category under which I perceive those who need my help. But that's why we're church, we're Catholic, we're inclusive. This is not a question of identifying a policy priority.
Grazie Eminenza, molto chiaro su questo.
Thank you, Your Eminence, for being so clear on this point. Elisabetta Piquet. Thank you, Elisabetta Piquet, La Nación Argentina. I wanted to ask Cardinal Czerny and Krajewski. Pope Francis, when speaking about the gospel, always said what we read in the Dilexi, and he was accused of being a communist pope, a Marxist pope, a poverty-fixated pope. Are you afraid that also Pope Leo may be accused too to be a communist pope, because here you read the same things that you find that are based on the gospel and that are to be found in the magisterium of the church? Thank you. So if this is to be found in the gospel, then we need to accuse Jesus. Thank you.
This is not a secret, so I think I can say it. Pope Francis always thought that the attacks were a sign that he was actually doing something. If they don't attack, you're not doing anything. So I wouldn't worry so much about that. The labels are much like we have in the gospel, the labels that were used to reject Jesus. They say much more about the person who is using the label. You asked that, what's your problem? the problem is not Pope Francis's or Pope Leo's. The problem is the person, the attacker. And I think you know the answers, what their problem is.
Grazie Eminenze. Felipe Dominguez e poi
Felipe Dominguez and then some people at the back.
Dominguez for O São Paulo newspaper in Brazil. I wanted to touch the liturgical dimension, which here in the document, number 41, as the Pope talks about St. John Chrysostomos. No, there's a very interesting quote when Chrysostomos says, we don't need golden vases, but golden souls, something like that. And as we know, this is a point that creates a lot of division and discussion in the church, the way we express our faith in the liturgy, and also, how to conciliate these two things, living the liturgy in a profound way, in a beautiful way, in a solemn way, but also that is visibly a witness of poverty and simplicity. So how would you comment on this point? Thank you.
I think that what you're asking is really about enculturation. You're asking how a people, a particular people, express their respect, their joy, their hope, and so the golden vessels are a way of saying this is very beautiful, very important, very sacred, very holy. I think it's a very, you might say, natural cultural reaction. Yeah. And what I think St. John Chrysostom and Pope Leo would say is that choices are subject to prayer and discernment. At this moment, in this parish, is a new chalice of 1,500 or 2,000 euro. Is that an expression now of what we want to say about ourselves, about God, about our place in the world? Or do those 2,000 go to something else? And I think to be fair, we should respect the decision that they make. Yeah, and not this St. John Chrysostom's quote is also an example of powerful rhetoric, but not to be taken, with kind of mathematical literacy. Yeah. So I would be open, would take an open attitude towards this and say that what Chrysostom is calling for us to do is to be conscious of the choices which we make as Christian communities and to respond with generosity, love, responsibility, but also self-awareness and, you might say, humility. We also need support for our faith, for the expressions of our faith. And a liturgy which is poorly prepared and poorly done doesn't help our faith.
Je me permets d'ajouter quelque chose. Je voudrais raconter rapidement une
I would like to share with you an anecdote from Rome. I was accompanying a pilgrimage in Rome, French people, and we got to St. Peter's. And I must say that I was embarrassed in getting inside because I was with very poor people. And in the evening when we talked about the day and I didn't know how to share everything that we have lived. Well, people started crying out and say, well, we also have a right to that beauty. So when these very poor people entered St. Peter, they said, well, this beauty is for me too. I also have a right to see such beauty. I also have the right to be in such a space. And this, I think, is what the Pope means. Well, it's true for the liturgy, economy, politics. How can we have a perspective, which is that of the poor too, not just ours. How can we understand the world also from the poorest, from the least of our brothers and sisters? Yesterday, there was a lunch at the Vatican. We took 16 people from the shower area, the people who sleep on the streets. And we placed the best linen we had on the table. We don't have, silver cutlery, but we use good cutlery. We put flowers and everything. And we do this every week. So as they were going out, they said, "Why are you treating us like this? We are no one. Why are you treating us like this?" And I said, "Because this is what Jesus would do. But through this way, we restore their dignity. We give them back their dignity. The fact that they come to the Vatican, they have no papers. This is always difficult for the Swiss guards and the police. They come with their rucksacks, which, this is how they live. This is what they have, their possessions. So this could also be an answer to you, that we give them back their dignity through the way in which we treat them, we welcome them. And we welcome Jesus like this by using the chalices. The problem is if the parish priest or the bishop is rich and then the diocese is poor, that is a problem. But when the parish priest is poor, nobody will celebrate with a golden chalice. And if this happens in your parish church, well, you're lucky. And then there is also that quotation at the beginning of the first chapter that speaks about this. So it's a quotation from the Gospel, which is explained by the Pope in the first chapter. Nicole?
Press Cardinal Czerny, if I may. I wonder if you could tell us where exactly the Church is with regard to liberation theology at this point, because we have a whole text now that talks about the preferential option of the poor. It cites Medellin, Puebla, all those critical documents that formed the basis of liberation theology, and then it just kind of dismisses very quickly the whole hoopla over the CDF document of 1984 and all those years of cracking down on these theologians, and it almost minimizes the whole thing. So I'm just wondering where we are now.
Can you give me the paragraph you're referring to?
It's towards the end.
Oh, all right. Well, you find it. I really don't think you're reading it correctly. It doesn't. There's no dismissing. There's no dismissing. There's, in fact, the Holy Father is picking up a document which, at the time, was hardly welcomed with universal applause. A document that was critical of liberation theology, and as I remember it, recuperates what the real point was, which is what we do. What we do. There are controversies, there are excesses, there's pain. There are people who go too far and get punished. There are other people who go too far and go free. That's life. But the Church keeps learning. And I think that if you wanted to know what has happened to liberation theology, you should survey how the word liberation is used nowadays in church documents. And I think you'll say, well, it's a good example, maybe a slightly more dramatic example, is the word solidarity. I'm old enough to remember when solidarity was a dirty, negative, left-wing word. Maybe you don't remember that, but I do. Today, there are few words that are more Christian, and that's in less than 100 years, as you can see. So no, I don't see what you're saying as like an abandonment or a refutation or a dump. Well, yeah, yeah. Well, that was the 1980s, and and now we're I mean, I just used the word of solidarity, but you could write a doctoral dissertation on words like this that come first of all from outside of the. This is not biblical vocabulary, at least as far as I know. Neither word is no, that's not true. Liberation is actually used in the Bible. And the concept of solidarity is very strong. But these words took their time to come in. But that's like so many other things. We're back to the question of enculturation. If you ask me as a representative of the church to tell you what the gospel means today, I need to find words from our culture that you understand that say the same thing. And that's the process. And we keep learning and we keep enculturating. And as the culture changes, we also have to change the vocabulary. So I don't. I think I know what you're asking, and I just don't see it in the way this was used or meant, and I don't see it as particularly important now, with all due respect for those who suffered at the time.
Grazie, Eminenza.
Thank you, Your Eminence. There was another question at the back. Good morning, Giovanni Panettiere, Quotidiano Nazionale. The Apostolic Exhortation, I think, criticizes, to a certain extent, those Christian groups which preach an elite pastoral in a context such as ours, which is defined of dictatorship by the economy. Do you feel the risk that this way of proclaiming the gospel may be increasingly popular and rooted in certain contexts, such as the United States or the Western world? Thank you.
Yeah, if we're allowed to say that the way in which our world is arranged is quite badly handled. The world is badly arranged. There are very many fundamental facts of world life which are not going well, and they're not going well because they're not managed well. If we're allowed to say that, well then, as it says in the gospel, let him or her who has ears hear. Which is the way the gospel works itself. The gospel is also let him or her who has ears hear. It's not throwing stones at somebody. It's inviting us to take responsibility for our choices and our options. That's what the gospel does, and that's what this does. I can't give you an all-englobing answer which says no. There's a way of speaking so that absolutely everyone feels good. It can't be. We're in big trouble. We are in big trouble, and part of the troubles are referred to in here. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That doesn't mean that I can go to so-and-so and say, you are, Dilexi went after you, That's not right. But let him or her read it, and maybe they'll see what it says to them.
Grazie.
Thank you, Mariano Sedano, Vida Religiosa, Madrid. I came in late because I was at the Jubilee of the Religious, and I see that 3 of the members who are here are religious. The Pope is religious. He presented the exhortation on the feast of St. Francis, and you presented today. Is this a coincidence, or there is also a message from the Pope to religious life? Well, perhaps the religious would like to say something. Perhaps first the Petit Sir, or... I cannot answer in the place of the Pope, of course, if this is coincidence or not, but I see a sign. And it seems to me that the document is provoking us as religious and to rethink the vow of poverty. Another personal anecdote: when I started working with people who live in precarious situations in France, I'd left my novitiate shortly before, and I went to them and I said, well, I'm a Franciscan. And a person came to me and she said at the end of the presentation, but what is a religious? And I just come out of formation, so I was so I said, oh, it's a person who took a chastity, obedience, and poverty vow. And he slapped me and he said, don't talk to me about poverty because I know what it is. And this is truly an experience that struck me. Our vow of poverty, even though St. Francis did not use these precise words, but anyway, how the poverty vow is not the vow of somebody who is running a marathon, but it's a vow that allows me to establish a stronger relationship with people. This seems to me to be important. Yes, please. I also feel that this is a document that really incites all of us. It provokes all of us, and we heard the difference between exhortation and encyclical. An exhortation is almost something that, well, it exhorts all of us, it pushes us, it questions us in words, and we must all read this document and try and understand to put it into practice. In religious life, I think that it's at the same time an encouragement, because it shows us how we are in this journey of the church, what we can bring to this journey with the others. And it's also an appeal for us to revise our way of living and the way in which we approach the poor. So in the document, we see this attitude, not just do for the others, but live with them, to see the world from their perspective. And this is a way of seeing and living life differently. The poor today are those who remind us all that we all need a place, that we need to respond to our basic needs, and that we must also be recognized in our dignity and in our humanity. Thank you, Sister Clemens. Nico Gioidi, freelance journalist, a question. And again, I'm referring to the quotation of St. John Chrysostom. Why, after 2,000 years since the coming of Christ, are we still discussing about the crisis that exists in the world? Perhaps the church should change. St. John Chrysostom, I had something else. He was crying when he said, those who become the officials of the Lord. Sorry, didn't catch the first part of the sentence.
I'm sorry, I really did question, but Matteo has translated it for me. The answer is because we're human. Our fragilities, our weaknesses, our mistakes, our needs, our gifts, all these are, in one sense, unique to each one of us individually. Each one is different, but they're also patterns of life. And I think that the great questions about life are always contemporary. And I don't think we say that because Plato or Aristotle tried to answer the question, why is there evil, that we don't have to ask it again. So unless I misunderstand the question, I feel you put your finger on what is perennially human, and the Church is committed to accompany humanity from beginning to end. I mean, we don't give up and say at a certain point, well, I guess we've done our job, and now they'll be okay on their own. We have to continue, because that's how we are humanly. And it's a bit like the earlier question about the, how much of this is Francis and how much of it is Leo. It's both, and our big questions are very old. Most of them are very old. Even the questions about AI are not so very fresh and very new. AI is unheard of even 5 years ago.
Io vorrei solo aggiungere
I only would like to add, if I've understood your question, it's true, sometimes we can ask this question, well, 2,000 years ago there was Christ, but here we are still where we stand today. But precisely because Christ chose this medium to reach out to us in our poverty, then these are our tools, and the tools of the church is not power, it's not strength, power, but it's to become small. But this takes time, and it requires first and foremost a personal conversion, the conversion of every one of us. So I think that the first question that we should ask ourselves is personal, within ourselves and in our communities. What can we do to make this church increasingly in the image of Christ? My feeling is also that we always tend to pass from one era to another, from one epoch to another. Pope Francis placed the Church in a synodal process, and in a document he said that the synodal journey is a synodal on which God expects the Church to follow, and will meet the Church 1,000 years from now. But personal conversion, institutional one, well, the synodal process is placed here, is rooted here. It's aimed at making the face of the Church. It has the aim of making us express Jesus better in today's context. Christianity is something that begins, Anya, and then perhaps we can end. Oh, sorry, there was Stefano who wanted to ask a question. Let us start with Anya, women first, and then Stefano. A question. Thank you for your presence. A curiosity, how did the Pope react to the fact that the Pope chose them as the theme of his first document? And His Eminence was talking about how the words of the Pope are translated into everyday life and into reality. We saw on the Almsgiving Office website that sometimes we read that at the moment we are taking no requests for parchment, So tell us something more about the repentance, those who are more generous. So how is developed the inheritance of Pope Francis in your work, Your Eminence? And what happens now with Pope Leo? Thank you. And then we shall, come back here at 4, because this question is going to take up at least a couple of hours to respond. Well, the poor do not know this document yet. They know that it exists, but they don't know it. So we must bring them this message. As to the Almsgiving Office, and I told this also to Pope Leo, after his election, an incredible thing happened in connection with the parchments that now we have requests for 20,000 a month. We don't know why this happened. So everybody can write and ask for this parchment from all over the world, but the almsgiving office is a small structure at the Vatican, so we had to limit the daily number of parchment requests, so we can go to a maximum of 300, 400 per day through the internet in terms of requests, while we have some 800 people who come every day to the almsgiving office asking for the blessing of the Holy Father, particularly those who come from the Jubilee. We are very happy because all the income goes to the poor. This is a good thing, so we do have money now. But the problem is that we are unable to produce all this parchment on time. And so that is why we had to limit this service a bit. But we explain everybody that the reason is why there aren't enough people to do this. And in today's world, nobody can wait. Everybody wants to have things right away. So if they know that, I don't know, they're getting married in 3 months' time, they will ask us the day before the marriage. But so this is the reason why. But the request is huge. And now we are talking about numbers such as 200,000 parchments every year. And all the money is given to the poor. Pope Francis once told me, if the money is not given to the poor, then it means you're going to go to hell, for sure. I'm quite sure. So you can feel safe that I don't want that to occur, so all the money goes to the poor. And perhaps there are also many people who come to the almsgiving office to help, I'm sure. I really liked your question when you were asking how did the poor react. For me, this is one of the ways we can deepen this document and what the church does. There's a scandal. I'm a member of an order, that of St. Francis, in which St. Francis kissed the leper, but St. Francis became a saint and the leper was left aside. The chapters on the poor are beautiful, but I wish they could have. The chapter on the saint is beautiful, but the poor who have been helped. A chapter on the poor who were helped. So, what are their prayers? What are their lives like? We don't know this. So, for me, this is a way, the road towards listening to these people and to what they have to give. And I see this, and I say this with great emotion, that it's like a scandal, and I wish that Saint Francis of Assisi and the leper became both saints together, but then it was Saint Francis who became a saint and not the poor, the leper. Well, the Pope quotes the Gospel when he says, the poor are proclaimed, announce the kingdom of heaven. So there is also the responsibility of proclaiming the gospel to them. And this is what the Pope was saying in the letter that Pope Leo wrote when he presented Dilexi. And so he said that the important thing is to draw the poor closer to the church. Stefano Pritelli, Washington Post. A question for Cardinal Czerny. I wanted to ask you, Your Eminence, there are observers in conservative and traditionalist sectors who've seen in some of the recent gestures of the Holy Father the signs of a possible similarity between the pontificate of Pope Leo to that of Pope Francis Can you get into the details and give us some concrete examples? For instance, what the Pope said about the meeting of the generals convoked by the Department of War. So the alarms issued on global warming, the discomfort shown by the Pope concerning precisely the meeting of the generals. the criticism versus indifference towards migrants and the commitment to keeping doors open to the LGBTQ plus community. So how can you respond to this this fear that sees in the similarities between Pope Leo and Pope Francis something that may be of concern to some?
As soon as you say a liberal pope, then we are pulling the pope and the ministry of Peter and his successors onto a very partial platform. It's true, you can interpret these things from a political science or sociological point of view, but and God bless you if you want to do that. But we can't answer in those same terms, and we shouldn't. I'm sure that Pope Francis would be unhappy to be called a liberal pope, and I'm sure that Pope Leo would not enjoy the label either. And it doesn't help. I mean, is the gospel liberal? Is the gospel liberal? I guess that's my answer.
L'ultima così poi chiudiamo.
Last question, because we need to conclude. Cardinal Konrad Krajewski, how can we make charity more structured and less whimsical or occasional? I don't think it should be structured. It's just like love isn't structured. The love of a mother towards a child. When the child needs something, she's always ready. So we mustn't look at administrative solutions. You know, there are these foundations that are so well structured and they eat up 70% of what they collect, and then what is left out, they send to the poor. So we don't need this type of administrations that eat up the resources that should be used for the poor. It's always a great scandal. I don't know, I have addressed problems for the past 13 years, and for instance, we send so much money to the entire world to help frail structures or communities that are unable to maintain their canteens, dormitories, and everything that comes to the Vatican comes through the nuncios. The nuncios send us letters, and if I remember correctly, maybe what we do is we answer on the same day. Only one occasion, I think it took 2 days, and we send help. If we were to act in a structured way, it would take us 3 months to answer a question or a request. How many people would die? So on the one hand, the structures are necessary, but on the other, at least the almsgiving office is a bit outside of this, let's say, logic of the structure, let's say. I remember a time, I think in the district of Primavalle, there was a big flooding and rain, and so many people were left homeless or there to leave their homes because they were flooded. And Pope Francis called me on the Saturday, and he said, go there right away, take the money and pay for hotels for all the people who are left homeless. And I said, Holy Father, it's a Saturday, banks are closed. Then he said, you know, I'm owner. And since then, part of the money is kept cash. And we do things immediately, right away, without waiting to call everybody, discussing, etc. And I remember I was saying that we pay sometimes 20,000 euros every month to the Vatican pharmacy for medicines, because people come to us and they receive medicines for free. And Pope Francis says, is that all? So little money. And sometimes I also ask myself this, is our account empty? If it's empty, things are good. And he said, if our account is full, then you are a lazy Pole. So the same goes for the journalists. When they like me, they say I'm a cardinal. Otherwise, they call me a Pole. Well, thank you for your answer. We may perhaps now close. Oh, Your Eminence, please.
I've been I've been coming here for press conferences for 15 years, and I just want to say that this one has been different from any of the others, and I wonder if you also have that experience, and if so, give thanks to God, give thanks to Pope Leo, and give thanks to because this has been an extraordinary experience. Thank you.
Grazie a lei, Eminenza, per averlo sottolineato.
And thank you for Your Eminence for highlighting this. Thank you everybody for participating. Thank you. Thank you to our speakers, and thanks to Pope Leo for giving us this apostolic exhortation. I would like to ask the speakers to remain for a moment for the photograph, and I would like to thank all those who participated. The speakers are available for interviews, so